Inside Elizabeth Taylor's Lost Tapes, the humanized story of a Hollywood icon. Gorgeous, glamorous, gritty, and heart-achingly honest. Elizabeth Taylor, How to Humanize an Icon. Hello, my darlings. I'm Meeks, and today we are not just dusting off the archive, we are resurrecting the myth, the menace, and the mink-lined chaos that is Elizabeth Taylor.
This program was made possible by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Specifically, Elizabeth Taylor, The Lost Tapes, the 2024 documentary Seance, directed by Nanette Bernstein, ends not with a bang, but with a click, a hiss. A tape recorder awakens, and then a voice, smoky, razor sharp, with just a touch of Beverly Hills bourbon, and absolutely zero interest in your approval.
I'm aware that a lot of you niggas don't like me, but I don't care what
It's Liz herself, narrating her story, and let me be clear, she is not here to atone. This documentary is not your classic memoir. It's a scorched earth monologue. A private confessional booth, for one, where diamonds, husbands, and cultural expectations are dragged into the spotlight and unceremoniously torched. The quiet power of this film, that it's Elizabeth, unfiltered and unbothered, guiding us through her own living autopsy, with the elegance of a woman who's already attended every funeral, including her own, metaphorically and several times in the tabloids, drawn from previously unheard audio. This isn't some reverent nostalgia reel, it's a manifesto in eyeliner, a survival manual disguised as scandal. A woman weaponizing the very Hollywood system that tried to consume her, and then using its bones as a chaise lounge. At first glance, you might think, oh no, this is another tragic starlet documentary, but I dare you to look again. Elizabeth does not present herself as a cautionary tale. She speaks as a person who was labeled by the media, owned by the studios, and had the world projected onto her. And her response to this, all of her faults, mistakes, and misgivings, I lived, she says. No apology, no explanation, just a cigarette, a shrug, and the eternal lightheartedness of someone who survived being and becoming herself. Let me be perfectly clear. This is not a documentary about Elizabeth Taylor. This is a documentary by Elizabeth Taylor, and in it she plays her most daring role yet. Not Cleopatra, not Maggie the cat, but a woman finally telling the truth. So grab a martini, or what's left of your sangria, fluff your boa, and prepare yourself, because this isn't a comeback. This is a coronation. And the crown, oh darling, it's encrusted. And yes, it definitely came from Mike Todd. Prologue. The myth enters the room. Or a goddess walks into a bar and orders a scotch. We open not on a palace or a soundstage, but something far more dangerous. A room with Elizabeth Taylor in it. The lights are low, the ice clinks, and a tape recorder hisses to life. Enter Richard Merriman, journalist, clear mortal, and audibly nervous human being. He's expecting the usual Hollywood masquerade, a manufactured goddess, all powder and PR. But instead, he's greeted by a woman with bourbon in her voice and mischief in her eyes. She offers him a drink, levels him with a look, and opens the floor not to an interview, but a confessional. I never pretended to be an angel, she says. And just like that, the myth starts to unravel. What unfolds is no performance. It's a reckoning in real time. Taylor isn't here to dazzle. She's here to deconstruct. And she's not wearing a veil. She's wielding a scalpel. The Hollywood machine may have tried to turn her into a symbol.
Completely superficial, immoral. There's the person that my family know, and the other Elizabeth Taylor, the commodity.
But in this moment, she's just a woman with a story, a scotch, and zero tolerance for bull. The truth, that's what I want, my truth. And let's be clear, this is not the kind of truth that asks for your pity. It doesn't beg for redemption. It's truth with the lashes on, truth in a Bulgari necklace worth $3 million. It stares you down and says, I've made mistakes, I've been reckless, but I've paid. Oh, I've paid. She doesn't flinch, she doesn't sugarcoat, and most importantly, she doesn't ask for your forgiveness. She declares war on the narrative, the one that painted her as vain, shallow, and manipulative. She rejects the tabloid's cartoon villain and replaces her with something far more dangerous, a human woman who lived. I'm sick of being misjudged, she tells Merriman. This is the truth. And just like that, Elizabeth Taylor, the myth, the woman, the media punching bag, turns the camera around. She's not your pinup. She's not your cautionary tale. She is your narrator. The goddess has entered the room. Part 1. Hollywood child star. Or Once Upon a Time in Suburban Beverly Hills. Elizabeth Taylor's early life plays like a fairy tale written by Vogue and ghost edited by David O. Selznick. Think English gardens and Hollywood palm trees, lavender perfume and air raid sirens, pony rides at golden hour with a war wailing in the background. She was the picture of cinematic innocence with a diamond core spine, born in London but transplanted to Los Angeles just before the Blitz, like the universe itself had placed her in soft lighting. It was a charmed childhood, she says, but always a little unreal, like I was already rehearsing for something. And indeed, she was. At 10, she landed a role in Lassie Come Home after a screen test left MGM executives blinking like they'd just seen a deity descend from the soundstage rafters. For Elizabeth, acting wasn't about stardom. It was instinctual, elemental. She wasn't chasing applause. She was chasing a fantasy. It was a more concrete form of make-believe, she says, like a child philosopher in kitten heels. She didn't recite lines. She absorbed them. The camera didn't just like her. It bent the knee. Roddy McDowell, her childhood co-star and lifelong friend, put it simply, she was more beautiful than should be allowed. And no, he wasn't exaggerating. The girl glowed. Even the lights knew to move out of her way. But it was National Velvet that launched the legend. At 12, Elizabeth faced one towering obstacle. She was too short. So what did she do? She started hanging from door frames like a coach or a bat every morning, stretching her spine as if willing her body into stardom. I'd hang like a bat just to squeeze another inch or two out of me, she laughs. And guess what? It worked. She grew 3 inches, part biology, part divine right. Velvet Brown wasn't just a role. She was Elizabeth's first avatar. Fierce, brave, and dream drunk. A girl galloping towards the future with no saddle and no apologies. But even then, the line between life and performance had begun to blur. Sometimes I wasn't sure where Velvet ended and I began, Elizabeth admits. But maybe that's just what childhood is when you grow up in front of the camera. Part 2. Adolescent stardom and forced sophistication. Or how to be sexy before you even kissed a boy. By her early teens, Elizabeth Taylor was no longer growing up. She was being manufactured. Her adolescence wasn't a phase. It was a product line. The MGM studio machine didn't just polish her. It preened, packaged, and pre-sold her to the public as the ultimate ingenue in pearls. A child in adult lighting. A teenager in a training bra and tiaras. At just 16, she was cast opposite Robert Taylor, not as his daughter, mind you, but as his wife. Draped in satin and lit like a boudoir painting, Elizabeth was posed to project desire she had never even felt. They said I was sexy, she later recalled, but I didn't even know what sexy was. Translation, the lashes came before the lust. The smolder came before the spark. She was coached into womanhood the way one learns to mimic a foreign language. Fluent in fantasy, but emotionally untranslated. She was told how to tilt her head, how to arch a brow, how to move her mouth just so. The roles she played weren't written for her. They were written onto her. And beneath the diamonds and direction notes, there was still a confused teenager silently mouthing the script of womanhood and waiting for real life to catch up. And school? Don't be absurd. Her education took place in trailer classrooms behind velvet curtains. 1 minute, she was reciting Shakespeare. The next, she was kissing co-stars under hot lights and hotter expectations. I hated it, she said. It wasn't a school. It was a holding pen. She wasn't learning. She was being staged. Her friendships were limited to co-stars and gossip column captions. Her social life curated by press agents. Her first boyfriends cast by publicists. MGM's publicity department went full Truman Show. They handpicked young male actors, fed them to the press as love interests, and paraded Liz around Hollywood as the nation's most enchanting teenage flirt. I wasn't dating them, she said. We were being seen. It was a script, just like the movies. They gave her the illusion of experience while protecting the fantasy of innocence. A delicate balancing act between virgin and vixen, curated entirely by men in suits with marketing plans. But behind all the chiffon and choreography, a fracture was forming. Elizabeth was beginning to feel it, the split between the icon and the girl, between Elizabeth Taylor, the headline, and Elizabeth, the person, the one just trying to figure things out. Her image had become a public utility, managed like a power grid. She belonged to moviegoers, to magazines, to executives, to America, not to herself. My body was becoming symbolic before it was even mine, she reflects. She was a starlet before she was a person, coached, cast, canonized. But beneath all the polish, something was beginning to crack. Not loudly. Not yet. But the seeds of rebellion were already rooting deep, because Liz wasn't just being cast in roles. She was being cast into womanhood, not asked to grow into it. Ordered to arrive, fully formed, gift-wrapped in glamour, and ready for her close-up. And the girl inside her, she was watching, waiting, plotting her eventual takeover. Part 3. The marriage carousel begins. Or, how to mistake a tiara for a helmet. At just age 18, Elizabeth Taylor, barely old enough to vote but already old enough to carry a film, a studio, and a myth, walked down the aisle in a gown spun from tulle, PR dreams, and industrial strength delusion. Her groom, Nicky Hilton, heir to the Hilton fortune. On paper, it was perfect. Hollywood royalty marries American aristocracy. The cameras loved it. The studio winced. Liz insisted. I thought something would happen to me once I was married, she said. I thought, like, I'd suddenly become a woman. Spoiler, what happened was not womanhood. It was terror. On their honeymoon, Liz found herself locked in the bathroom. Too frightened to come out, she wasn't just shy, she was petrified. The sex symbol of a generation had no idea what sexy was supposed to feel or look like. I was a virgin in every way, she recalled. Physically, emotionally, mentally, I knew nothing. She waited for desire to show up like room service. It didn't. Nicky grew frustrated, then angry, then cruel. The fairy tale shattered faster than a champagne flute on marble. He spiraled into drinking, gambling, and rage. The emotional violence became physical. Elizabeth suffered a miscarriage and later admitted that it was caused by his abuse. The wedding was lovely, she said with a razor smile. Then came disillusionment.
Nothing bad ever happens to the Kennedys! Bitch, sit down.
The marriage imploded within a year, and so began Elizabeth's first real heartbreak, served to the public on a silver platter of scandal. The tabloids circled like buzzards. The narrative was instant. The teen goddess was already too tragic, too dramatic, too much. But something strange happened in the ashes. Freedom. Elizabeth found solace not in a lover, but in a sanctuary of safety. Her gay friends. Artists, designers, outsiders, men who had been misread, mislabeled, and misunderstood by society. I worshipped them, she said. They were safe. There was no sexual tension. I could be silly and real and open. Their pain, hidden, coded, and closet-bound, allowed for a kind of radical honesty. They loved her not for who she was supposed to be, but for who she actually was. And for the first time, Elizabeth Taylor wasn't a headline or a commodity. She was just Liz. It wasn't charity. It wasn't performance. It was recognition. Shared survival. The unspoken bond between those who've been possessed by public fantasy. But of course, the cycle wasn't done spinning. Elizabeth, young, romantic, and raised on studio-scripted ideals, still believed in love as salvation. If marriage couldn't make her whole, perhaps a different man could. Enter Michael Wilding. A calm between tempests. British, older, gentle as chamomile. Michael Wilding offered exactly what Liz thought she needed. A break from the drama. He was calm to her chaos, safety after violence. He was kind, gentle, and steady, she says. I think I needed a little bit of that after everything. They married in 1952. Elizabeth was 20. She tried to make herself small, domestic. She baked, she mothered, she had 2 sons, Michael Jr. and Christopher. She played 1950s housewife like she once played Velvet Brown, with commitment, sincerity, and a sense of vague confusion. It was sweet, she later said, but it was quiet, and I wanted it to be enough. But Elizabeth Taylor was not built for enough. The world expected a goddess, and the goddess couldn't stay in the kitchen. Wilding was kind, yes, but passive, emotionally absent. She began to feel muted, understimulated, and drenched in beige. And when your screen persona is all diamonds and fire, beige starts to feel like betrayal. I outgrew him, she said. I needed intensity, color, life. And so her second marriage dissolved, not in scandal, but in slow, quiet erosion. A retreat, not an explosion. And yet, through it all, Elizabeth remained devout to the only role that she never resented. Mother. I may not have always been the perfect wife, she later said, but I was a mother, and I loved those boys with everything I had. This chapter feels like an intermission, a rare breath in an otherwise breathless life, a pause before the next storm. But make no mistake, Elizabeth Taylor was not meant for stillness. She was born for spectacle. And the carousel? Oh baby, it's still spinning. Part 4. The Mike Todd era. Love, spectacle, and shattering loss. Or the only man who didn't ask her to dim her light. If Elizabeth's second marriage was like a soft jazz interlude in beige, Mike Todd arrived like a trumpet solo soaked in tequila and glitter. He wasn't just a husband, he was a production manager in a tuxedo, a man with the chaotic magnetism of someone who could sell you the moon and convince you he owned it. Elizabeth didn't just fall for him, she exploded into him. He was the only real man I ever loved. she would later say. And when Elizabeth Taylor says real, she means Technicolor. Todd was a showman with the instincts of a magician and the spending habits of a Bond villain. He once declared, "I know nothing more pleasant than trying to spoil her," and spoil her he did, with the kind of theatrical generosity that turned love into luxury. Diamonds weren't gifts. They were devotions carved in carats. For her engagement ring, he famously bypassed a vulgar 30 carats and went with 29 and 7/8. Because with Mike, even restraint came with a wink. She affectionately called it her ice skating rink. He called her my Liz, and in his orbit, she didn't have to be small. She didn't have to apologize. I was finally allowed to be big, she says. Not too much, not too dramatic, just me, only more. Together, they were a glittering fever dream. Private jets, 5-star pillow fights. Red carpets rolled out like royal decrees. They lived in a montage of premieres and passion, and amid the pageantry, something extraordinary happened. Elizabeth Taylor was happy, not playing at love, not performing contentment for the press. She was living it. Their daughter, Liza Todd, was born in the golden blur of laughter and lace. Elizabeth had, for a brief, flickering moment, everything she'd ever been told she wasn't allowed to want. Love, joy, power, and her full self. She even remarked that she was going to retire, finishing out her contract with MGM. The last movie that she planned to do was Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. It seemed like Liz was truly on the cusp of achieving what she believed would be true happiness. But like any great opera, Part 4 ends in tragedy. In March 1958, Mike Todd boarded his private plane, aptly named the Liz, for a trip to New York. Elizabeth, down with the cold, stayed behind, but something inside her shifted, a chill far colder than the flu. "I felt it," she said. "Something inside me just broke." That night, she wore his favorite dress. She stood by the phone, already knowing that it wouldn't ring. The Liz had crashed in New Mexico. Everyone aboard was killed. And just like that, her universe disintegrated, because Liz didn't just lose her husband, she lost her mirror, her amplifier, the man who told her that she didn't have to contort herself into something that she wasn't to be loved. Without him, she said, I felt dismembered. And here, in the rubble of romance, comes one of the most quietly iconic moments of the entire Taylor timeline. She went back to work. Within days, Elizabeth returned to the set of Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, not because she was healed, not because she was ready, but because Mike would have wanted her to finish it. He would have hated me sitting around crying. So she showed up, grief-stricken, hollow, draped in silk and devastation. On set, she moved like a ghost, but when the cameras rolled, something ancient woke up. Her performance as Maggie the Cat wasn't acting, it was alchemy. It was a woman in agony translating pain into poetry, grief into heat, loss into cinema. She wasn't playing broken. She was broken. And she let us see it. In Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, we saw the emergence of a new Elizabeth, raw, sensual, and volcanic. Not a studio darling or a passive object of desire, but a woman roaring against the world. This part doesn't end with a wedding, it ends with a death. And from that death, a myth is born. Because when the man who saw her died, Elizabeth Taylor could have vanished. But instead, she transformed. Part 5. The grief, guilt, and the birth of a tabloid villain. Or Diamond's despair and a scandal fit for the Vatican. When Mike Todd died, Elizabeth Taylor didn't just crumble, she cracked. Elegantly, publicly, like a Fabergé egg under floodlights. Still glamorous, yes, but leaking sorrow through the seams, and into her grief-laden silence stepped Eddie Fisher, Mike's best friend, crooner in residence, and oh yes, Debbie Reynolds' husband. At first, it wasn't romantic. It was ritualistic. Eddie knew the cadence of Mike's laugh, their inside jokes, the emptiness that he had left behind. It was sick, Elizabeth later admitted, but he was the only person who understood that kind of silence. And so began Hollywood's most infamous grief spiral. What was never really love, trauma cosplaying as romance, became tabloid warfare the second it hit the press. And, kindly, America lost it. Debbie Reynolds, the wholesome, pigtailed embodiment of post-war purity, was instantly cast as the wounded wife. And Elizabeth? She was crowned home-wrecking Jezebel of the Western world. Protesters waved signs, headlines roared, the Vatican, the literal Vatican, issued a formal condemnation. Congratulations, Liz, you weren't just a scandal, you were biblical. Then all the shit hit the fan. She deadpans in the dock. Elizabeth, never one to leave a saint unpoked, added, Debbie put on such an act with the pigtails and the diaper pins and the whole thing coming as a big shock. Whoop. Elizabeth never claimed it was love. She never even really liked Eddie all that much. She admits it was a mistake before the wedding and she just didn't know how to stop it. The press saw passion, but she was drowning. The only thing we had in common was Mike, she said. And that's a hell of a thing to build a marriage on. Still, she married him. Maybe out of guilt, maybe inertia, maybe because letting go of Eddie felt like letting go of the last trace of Mike Todd's shadow. But the marriage, oh, darling, it was a mausoleum. Quiet, cold, and haunted. Not love, but grief in formal wear. And in the darkest corner of that tomb, Elizabeth broke. She attempted suicide. No tabloid stunt, no drama, just despair. I would have rather died than go through another divorce, she said. For a woman who had worn widowhood, scandal, and stardom like couture, this was different. This wasn't about being too much. This was about being done. But she lived, and that survival rewrote the rules of fame. I was trying to grieve, she later said, and I got lost. Part 6. Cleopatra, Burton, and the media apocalypse, or the birth of the tabloid queen and the death of privacy. Let's get one thing straight. Elizabeth Taylor didn't play Cleopatra. She summoned her, signed the contract, grabbed the crown, and in the process, rewrote the Hollywood economy in violet ink. She was the first actor, man or woman, to demand $1 million paycheck plus 10% of the gross. That deal, negotiated by herself. No agents, no middlemen, just in a silk blouse and a don't fuck me grin. I enjoyed being a businesswoman, she later said, like someone who could collapse a studio with a glance. And collapse it she did. The Cleopatra shoot was cursed from day one. Biblical plagues would have been less expensive. There were delays, rain, a budget hemorrhaging faster than Caesar's Senate run, and then disaster. Elizabeth nearly dies. Emergency tracheotomy, lungs full of fluid, her heart stops, not once, but 4 times on the operating table. I was pronounced dead, she says casually. She wakes up unable to speak. Her scar becomes legend. Her survival, mythological. Hollywood hands her an Oscar for Butterfield 8 soon after. Not for the role, she says, but for the near-death headline. I won the award for my tracheotomy, she shrugs. Icon behavior. And then he arrives. Richard Burton, hungover, sweating, trembling on set. Alcoholism. A mess of a man with a voice like God and a liver like a war crime. He looks at her, hands her his coffee, unable to hold it. Hold this, love, will you? She holds it, and in a way, never lets go. My heart sort of went out to him, she says. He was terribly nervous and sweet and shaky, and that just endeared me so to him. The chemistry, volcanic. Not romance, cataclysm. Within weeks, they're entangled. Within months, they're international scandal. The press screams. The Vatican once again denounces her. Protesters descend. The Italian FBI investigates a bomb threat on her life. A columnist suggests her children should be taken away. It made me vomit, she says, voice flat and diamond hard. But this time, Elizabeth doesn't retreat. She ascends. In Cleopatra's most iconic scene, she enters Rome atop a golden sphinx flanked by trumpets cheered by thousands. I really was trembling that they might run up and tear me to shreds. Instead, the crowd surges, chanting, "Bacchia, Liz! Bacchia! Kiss her, kiss her!" Tears streamed down her face. The queen had arrived, not just in film, but in the collective consciousness. She was no longer just a star. She was the storm around which the media revolved. The media machine was mutating. The paparazzi era is born. Photographers dress as plumbers to break into her house. One disguises himself as a priest to sneak onto her lawn. The word paparazzi enters the dictionary. They were going for the destruction of the glamour, a friend said. But Elizabeth, she weaponized it. Not running from scandal, but surfing it in couture. She's not hiding. She's not ashamed. She's sipping champagne in Capri while the headlines burn. Her life, her body, becomes a battleground between morality and myth, sin and survival. I don't want to be a sex goddess, she says, tired. I'm a woman. I love being a woman. I think sex is absolutely gorgeous, but I've never thought of myself that way. I'm a broad, not a goddess, not a symbol, not your fantasy, just a broad who knew how to cash $1 million check in gold eyeliner. Elizabeth Taylor didn't just star in Cleopatra. She became her. The opulence, the danger, the politics of desire. She launched 1,000 press releases. 1,000 think pieces, 1,000 condemnations, and still she reigned. I know I will never pay the bill, she says, somewhere between regret and resolve, but that's not something you can put in this story. Oh, but Liz, my darling, we just did. Pause. Are you subscribed? Have you liked this video? Because you're pretty deep into this cultural autopsy. Join our family. Become a part of the cultural elite. It's free. Part 7. Taylor and Burton, the first marriage, the love that devours. or what happens when a sex symbol and a Shakespearean collide in a Scotch-fueled supernova. They marry in Toronto, 1964, not in a cathedral, not in private, but in the furnace of global scandal. The world gasps, protesters weep, the Vatican probably lights a candle. This isn't a wedding. This is a pressurized and mythic event. Cleopatra and Mark Antony, reincarnated in diamonds and desire, finally saying, I do. But there are no doves, no veil, just paparazzi and fire. This is not a marriage. This is an eruption in couture. Elizabeth calls it obsessive and uncontainable. Burton, between gulps of scotch and Shakespearean barbs, calls her the greatest actress in the world when she feels like it. They don't fall in love, they plummet. They adopt a daughter, Maria. They buy yachts, castles, islands, and diamonds the size of trauma cycles. They live like Olympian alcoholics. Scotch for breakfast, vulgari receipts for dessert, fights that level hotel suites, reconciliations that could power entire national economies. Fighting and loving were our two favorite sports, Liz quips, but we were addicted to each other, and they work constantly. The VIPs, the Sandpiper, the Taming of the Shrew, where life and script blur. Burton plays Petruchio, the boar. Taylor plays Katharina, the wasp. If I be waspish, best beware my sting. And then, who's afraid of Virginia Woolf? The moment, the exorcism. Gone is the glittering goddess. In her place, Martha. Boozy, embittered, and brilliantly human. Elizabeth gains weight. She dons prosthetics, smears her beauty into something weaponized. She plays 50 at 32 and makes you believe it. Not with makeup, but with rage. No gowns, no gloss, no grit. Just craft. This isn't Elizabeth Taylor, the fantasy. This is Elizabeth Taylor, the reckoning. She wins her second Oscar, not for surviving scandal, not for Cleopatra, not for being the most photographed face on the earth, but for this, obliterating the idea of who Elizabeth Taylor was ever supposed to be. She is no longer just a body. As Richard Burton said, again, perhaps drunk, but never wrong, she was magnificent, terrifying, the greatest actress in the world, when she wants to be. Part 8. Divorce, addiction, and the mirror cracks. Brilliance burns, and then it scorches. The white-hot flame that once lit Burton and Taylor now sears, twisting into something corrosive. Burton drinks like a man trying to drown his own myth, ferocious and relentless. Taylor numbs with pills, food, denial, and fur coats soaked in sorrow. Their passion isn't love anymore. It's a tidal force pulling them under, spitting them out over and over again. They aren't lovers. They're celestial bodies locked in diamond orbit, twin stars heading for a supernova. Their love turns war zone. Diamonds fly, insults scream, crystal shatters. The paparazzi feast on their unraveling. Behind the glamour, exhaustion. Behind the myth, rot. Fame mutates from palace to prison. The press, once they're coronators, become cannibals. They're no longer actors, but a brand, a pathology, a spectacle, growing bigger than the people beneath it. They feed it endlessly, trapped watching themselves through the world's eyes. Fight, they separate, they reunite. Then, in 1974, divorce. But the story isn't over. Obviously not. A year in Botswana, they marry again.
They say that two wrongs don't make a right. I don't want to make a right. I want to make a point.
Why? Because no one else could survive their inferno. Burton Taylor wasn't a tabloid tag. It was a shared nervous system. Even their children spoke of them as one mythic organism. Thunder and lightning, gin and vermouth, Cleopatra and Mark Antony, cursed to endlessly rewrite the same tragic love story. But the second marriage is brittle, hollowed out, the legend calcified into performance art, and this time they're too tired to rehearse. The love that once devoured now devours itself. The second divorce comes in 1976. No comeback. No rainy airport kiss. Elizabeth Eversharp sums it up. It wasn't a happy ending, but it was a great story. And she's right. Burton Taylor was never a fairy tale. It was a Greek tragedy in Dior, told in vodka, lipstick, and a cigarette ash. A love so vast, so cinematic. It's not that they couldn't live without each other. It's that they never really wanted to. And by the time they tried, it was too late. They weren't just soulmates. They were soul mirrors. And sometimes when that reflection is too honest, there's only one choice left. You look away. Part 9. The woman behind the legend. By her 40s, the tale had curdled. Once crowned the most beautiful woman on earth, Elizabeth Taylor had become the most mocked. Headlines gleefully tore into her weight. The public jeered at her endless marriages. Cleopatra, the divine, untouchable queen, was recast as a punchline. A cautionary tale, bloated with diamonds too big, husbands too many, and eyeliner too permanent. But here's the twist. She didn't give a damn.
I hate you. Good! Keep it that way! I like it! You hate me? That's fucking hot. I'm gonna kiss your lips.
Instead of begging for mercy, she dared the world to keep watching. Regrets a waste, she said, vodka in hand, half smile in place. I lived. That's what I did. She leaned into self-parody, riding the tabloid carousel with gleeful defiance. They laughed? Fine. She made damn sure she got top billing as the joke. Once the highest paid actress in the world, Elizabeth Taylor had morphed into America's most expensive punchline. But unlike starlets that get chewed up and spat out by the machine, she leaned in further and embraced life, royalty on her own terms. A phoenix with PR savvy and venomous charm. Her contradictions were legendary and fully intentional. A public whore, she quipped, with the ideals of a Victorian schoolgirl. A sex symbol who never claimed the title. Sex is gorgeous, she said, but I'm a woman. I'm a broad. Acting for Taylor wasn't a craft. It was gut, sweat, soul, and shakes. No technique, just instinct. Yet the media obsessed over her body, publishing her weight like IMDb scores, mocking her aging like it was a crime. They wanted her to disappear. She didn't. She stayed. Her operatic, alcohol-soaked relationship with Burton collapsed under its own legend. He drank, she numbed. They fractured, reconciled, and fractured again. One marriage, then another, then ashes. It wasn't a happy ending, she said, but it was a great story. And it was. Taylor's final act, the ultimate plot twist. She survived not just scandal, but grief, misogyny, exploitation, and illness. She became an activist, a CEO, a mogul of image and reinvention. Showing up to the White House dripping in 33 diamonds, visiting Betty Ford twice, launching a fragrance empire, and fighting AIDS before it was cool or even acceptable. She never went quietly because she never intended to. Elizabeth Taylor also never tried to rewrite the narrative. It's a losing game, she said, voice half exhausted and half amused. People already have their vision, good or bad. If you try to explain, you'll lose yourself. She could have hired PR, rebranded, launched a sobering campaign, but what's the point? The world had already decided. Sex goddess, husband stealer, and walking spectacle. I gave up a long time ago, she confessed, not bitter, but wise. To explain would dilute the myth, so she let her contradictions stand, unedited, unresolved, and unmistakably her. In the film's final moment, she raises her glass. Vodka. Older, softer, fleshier, hair piled like a crown, eyes still violet, still defiant. I don't pretend I haven't made mistakes, she says. I just survived them better than most. Elizabeth Taylor. Not a sex symbol, not a goddess, not a cautionary tale. A woman, a broad, a legend, and a survivor. The blueprint for everyone who came after her. Okay, what's the point of peering into someone's life, especially someone whose gowns cost more than our rent and whose scandals were front page before we were born? The answer, in short, is theory. To study a life like Elizabeth Taylor's is not just an exercise in voyeurism or nostalgia. It's a form of cultural diagnosis. As Roland Barthes argued, myth is the way society talks about itself through symbols. And Elizabeth Taylor wasn't just a woman. She was a symbol machine. Through her marriages, her stardom, her grief, and her unapologetic audacity, we glimpse the collective anxieties, fantasies, and contradictions of the society that watched her. Looking at her life, or any life rendered hyper-visible by fame, is a chance to excavate the structures that shape our own: power, gender, desire, grief, and performance. Michel Foucault might call it a genealogy of emotion, a way of understanding how private suffering becomes public spectacle and how cultural norms are both enforced and disrupted through individual lives. So when we analyze Taylor, we're not just gossiping, we're interrogating the machine. And in the process, maybe seeing a little more clearly the myths we've swallowed whole.
Do you think beauty has its own curse?
No. As long as you realize it's a very superficial thing and something that can disappear in a second and means nothing.
Taylor and Richard Burton's so-called love story was never simply a romance. It was a mythopoeia performed under the white-hot lights of an evolving media landscape. Their passion, excess, and volatility were consumed by a new kind of audience, not just filmgoers, but global voyeurs empowered by the burgeoning paparazzi complex. This was no longer the cloistered glamour of old Hollywood's velvet curtain studio system. This was the age of open surveillance, where the private self was considered the most valuable consumable spectacle. Richard Dyer's theory of the celebrity as myth is crucial here. Elizabeth wasn't merely an actress or a celebrity, but a symbolic battleground, palmescent of beauty, scandal, loss, and resilience. Her life, curated, consumed, and constantly rescripted, unfolded like a postmodern epic in real time. The birth of the paparazzi marked a rupture, the fall of the old studio fortress, and the rise of the spectacle economy. In this sense, Elizabeth Taylor stands at the cultural fault line, straddling the post-war collapse of domestic idealism and the rise of sexual autonomy. Her affair with Burton, condemned by the Vatican no less, wasn't just a tabloid scandal. It was a flashpoint in the sexual revolution. As Michel Foucault might argue, her body became a site of biopolitical struggle, governed by public scrutiny yet wielded as a form of resistance. Every marriage, every affair, every photo op became an act of negotiation between the self and society, power and objectification, and she played the game with devious skill. Laura Mulvey's male gaze hovers over Taylor's filmography, but unlike the passive woman Mulvey describes, Taylor weaponized her visibility. She refused to be a canvas, she became the painter. Her seductions were performances, her pain commodified but never hollow. "I will try to get away with murder," she famously quipped, and indeed she did, over and over again, smirking under long lashes and diamonds large enough to double as diplomatic gifts. Each marriage was a geopolitical maneuver, each divorce a treaty annulled. Her unions weren't love stories, they were statecraft in heels. And nowhere was this more clear than with Richard Burton. Their relationship was a volatile balance of power, ego, and erotic sovereignty, a Cold War played out in caftans and Cartier. One could map Antonio Gramsci's hegemonic theory onto their dynamic. Two cultural titans engaged in a long war of position, endlessly wrestling for narrative supremacy in the tabloids, on stage, in their art. Elizabeth Taylor wasn't just a casualty of media culture. She was its insurgent. Her trajectory mirrors Byung-Chul Han's psychopolitics, where the self becomes brand and vulnerability becomes capital. She turned personal trauma into aesthetic force. Case in point, Butterfield 8, a film she loathed, a role she deemed punishing. And yet she accepted her Oscar with a flourish that turned humiliation into legacy. Feminist critiques have long positioned her as both a victim and victor of industrial capitalism's gendered gaze, a star manufactured and devoured by the machine. But Taylor didn't simply survive the machine. She hacked it, bent it, recoded it. Through the lanes of Cheryl Harris's whiteness as property, we can view Taylor's early value, her pale skin, violet eyes, and hyper-feminine beauty, as a kind of tradable capital. Her marriage to Conrad Hilton was less a romantic venture and more of a transaction, a patriarchal investment gone violently awry. But unlike many, Taylor didn't dissolve into ruin. She re-emerged, power consolidated, narrative retaken. With Michael Wilding, we witness her dabble in the bourgeois mother-wife ideal, a temporary PR campaign of mid-century domesticity. Nancy Fraser would label this a strategic deployment of recognition politics, playing the part of respectable womanhood to stabilize her social currency. But Liz was never meant for suburbia. Enter Mike Todd, not a husband, but an empire. Achille Mbembe's aesthetics of power illuminates this phase, lavish gifts as diplomatic tools, charisma as soft governance. When Todd died, Taylor did not simply grieve, she ascended. She became the sacred widow, mourning, maid, myth. And then came Eddie Fisher, the scandal, the rupture, the conversion of grief into a performative heel turn. By this point, Elizabeth wasn't just navigating the system, she was the system. The Fisher affair revealed her mastery of narrative chaos, flipping infidelity into a financial, cultural, and reputational gain. She became a simulation of herself a la Baudrillard, a perfect hyperreal fusion of woman, brand, and media machine. She was no longer a participant in the culture. She was the culture. Then there was Bert, not a lover, not a co-star, but an equal adversary in a war of myth and meaning. Their union was mutual imperialism. They consumed one another on-screen, off-screen, and through every atom of publicity. They weren't actors. They were a sovereign duet. Each headline a diplomatic cable, each diamond a symbol of mutually assured destruction. Their collapse was inevitable, and still she didn't fall. She transformed. By the 1980s, Elizabeth's pivot to AIDS activism wasn't a late reinvention. It was the culmination of her political project. Her soft power, once used to navigate scandal, was redirected towards systemic resistance. Chantal Mouffe's agonistic pluralism helps explain this move. Taylor enters the public sphere not as a reconciled figure of harmony, but as a disruptive force, a celebrity insurgent refusing the apolitical performance expected of aging female stars. Her advocacy reframed the cultural conversation, not through moral purity, but through celebrity clout. She deployed glamour as gravitas, weaponizing her iconography in service of justice. To borrow from Stuart Hall, Elizabeth Taylor enacted cultural resistance, not by rejecting fame, but by infusing it with ideological weight. And the documentary, with its recovered audio tapes, functions as an act of media archaeology. They shatter the tabloid silhouette and resurrect the interiority of a woman too often reduced to gloss and glamour. In them, Taylor is cunning, raw, hilarious, powerful, a woman who saw the Hollywood machine from the inside and learned not just to survive it, but to own it. So let us declare it plainly. This is not a documentary about Elizabeth Taylor's life by some people who think that they knew who she was. This is a doctrine, a sovereign strategy of aesthetic capitalism and effective diplomacy. She was not a woman with too many husbands. She was a state without borders, an icon without apology, a one-woman government of the self. Her life was not a cautionary tale. It was a constitution. Control the gaze, weaponize scandal, and always, always exit in diamonds. And if you made it this far, oh my god, thank you so much for watching. Gilly and I are so happy to have 90 subscribers. He doesn't know what that means, but I'll tell him. Thank you very much, everyone who has subscribed to the channel. We put out new videos every other Thursday. Wave to the internet. But yeah, we're very thankful and we appreciate all of you. Could you just stand there? We see all your nice comments and we love you guys. So thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next one, my sweet baby angels.